The Springdale School District has made national news lately, specifically Har-Ber High School. What got everyone's attention is that the school district shut down the Har-Ber School newspaper for publishing a controversial article about 5 football players who transferred to Springdale High. I've seen tons of comments and articles about this, and people are concerned that it's a violation of the First Amendment. What I haven't seen many people talk about is that the Supreme Court has ruled directly on when a school can censor its own newspaper. That's what this video is about. Before we get too far into this video, everyone who watches Appealing Information should know that we don't take sides on issues like this. Nothing in this video is official legal advice. In fact, I think that Springdale School District has actually allowed Har-Ber to put their school newspaper back up. So there's not even any legal actions currently pending, as far as I know. But I did want to try to explain to you what the rules are with regard to schools, their newspapers, and what the Supreme Court has said. So the first thing we need to talk about is whether the First Amendment is even questioned in this case. In order to have a First Amendment question, you need 2 things. You need the government censoring speech. The First Amendment is only brought into question when it is the government doing the censoring. So anything that involves Twitter or Facebook or Google or any other private company trying to select who is able to use their platform, that doesn't bring in the First Amendment. The second thing that has to be considered is whether or not what is being censored is actually speech. For example, the clothes we wear. Is that considered speech? Putting a sign in our car. Would that be considered speech? Neither of those things are actually talking to someone, but legally they are considered speech. There's a whole line of Supreme Court cases and laws that have been passed regarding what is speech. But all you need to remember is if you are trying to express yourself, then it is more than likely going to be considered speech. So here in the Har-Ber High School case, we definitely have a government entity, the school, censoring speech, the article. But the Supreme Court has said that there are certain instances when the government can censor speech and it not be a violation of the First Amendment. There's a whole number of cases on this, specifically involving schools. Schools are allowed to have dress codes, schools are allowed to have codes of conduct, schools are allowed to do other things that inhibit the expression of the students in order to further their academic purposes. I don't think any parent is going to want a school that allows kids to just run around wherever they want, do whatever they want, and say whatever they want at all times. That doesn't sound like a place where your kid's going to be very well educated. And when it comes to school newspapers, the Supreme Court has specifically ruled that it is sometimes okay for a school to censor its own newspaper. This comes from a 1988 case called Hazelwood School District v. Kuhlmeyer. The Supreme Court furthered this theory that a school can censor its students' speech for anything that is reasonably related to a legitimate academic purpose. But they even went further when it comes to school newspapers. School newspapers usually carry the school's name, and the Supreme Court says that that made it school-sponsored speech. And since it is school-sponsored speech, the school has much more control over the content of that school newspaper. The Supreme Court even laid out a list of examples where it would be okay for a school to censor its own newspaper. This covered everything from being not grammatically correct to just being poorly written to being poorly researched. It's a pretty lengthy list. The Supreme Court even gave schools the right to censor their newspapers on any material that would associate the school with one side or the other of anything in political controversy. Now, whether the Har-Ber High School situation with the transferring football players falls under a political controversy or whether it's related to a legitimate educational interest, we're not going to say. The last thing that anyone should do is form an opinion on something like this when you don't have all of the facts. But hopefully, now we all know at least a little bit more about what the government's allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do. So go forth, have discussions, and impress your friends with how informed you are on this particular aspect of the law. Don't forget to like this post, share us on Facebook, subscribe on YouTube, and keep up with everything that we're doing with Appealing Information. We'll see you next week.